speakers with us today. And Mary Rose Mazzola, I'll do a longer introduction, but she's from Planned Parenthood of Mass, heads up Aspire, which is I'll describe in a few minutes, but and the other speaker is Senator Cindy Friedman. Cindy Friedman is the head of the healthcare, financial healthcare policy, but she's been a leader in the Senate on women's issues as well as a number of other issues. So we're honored to have both of our speakers with us today. And let me see. We are recording. We will be posting it on Mass Peace Action websites as well as our YouTube channel. And that is, we will also send all the participants out a resource list and an action page that they will get after mainly including the list of Planned Parenthood bills that we would like you to support. And we have a lot of wonderful advocates connected with Mass Peace Action. We have 20,000 members, but we have a lot of people who do legislative work that needs to be done. So we do hope that you will all.
I'm going to correct you there. We have 20,000 email supporters. We have about 2,000 dues-paying members, though.
Oh, well, dues-paying members, but you get people, 20,000 get all of our information. So, gee, we should have more paid members.
Senator Friedman is here now.
Oh, good. Well, welcome, Senator Friedman. We're happy to have you here. That's Cindy Friedman from Arlington. And so in terms of overall, I think, what time is it? 7:03. Are we still bringing people in? So we will send the information out to folks and the resource pages, the action pages, and we will start the program in a few minutes. But just as the introduction on reproductive rights, today is the first anniversary of the Roe Act being shut down by the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision. And so it is very appropriate that we are meeting tonight to take action steps nationally, but particularly here in Massachusetts. We want to there are actions we can still take. We've done a good job, but there's more that we can do. And we just had some great news from Mary Rose on what the governor is doing today. So she'll be able to tell us a little bit more about that. We are fortunate that we are an activist state in Massachusetts, and we are reaching out to help other states and have more resources here in Massachusetts. So I think, is Cindy here? I think we have.
Yes, Cindy. Yeah.
There she is. Okay, welcome, Senator Friedman. We really appreciate you coming. And Mary Rose is already here. So the format is going to be that Mary Rose will speak for 20 minutes with slides, and then Senator Friedman will speak for 20 minutes, and then we will have an open Q&A for the last 20 minutes of the session. So if you'd please hold your questions until the end. You can also put your questions in the chat while we're as we're thinking about it, thoughts fly. You can just leave them in the chat, and we will have somebody reviewing chat to pull out questions. So Mary Rose Mazzola is Director of Planned Parenthood Massachusetts Aspire Center for Sexual and Reproductive Health, who oversees Planned Parenthood's nationally recognized research, clinical training, and professional education programs. She's an educator at Harvard Kennedy School and Merrimack College as well. So something I didn't know. So without further ado, Mary Rose Mazzola, welcome and take over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bonnie. Thank you, Cole, for hosting as well. And thank you to Senator Friedman for joining me in this discussion. I used to work in the Senate, so it's an honor to be on a panel with the Senator. So I am going to share some slides, not too many, but just to kind of ground us in where we're at both nationally and then also in Massachusetts. And so we will kind of start off with Bonnie already referenced that we're, just about approaching the anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which got rid of both Roe v. Wade, which is the most famous case protecting abortion laws, but also Planned Parenthood v. Casey, two famous Supreme Court cases that essentially set the floor for abortion rights in the US. And so in the months and, the almost year now that has followed, what's gone into effect is 14 full bans on abortion. And then we also have Georgia that has a 6-week ban, which is essentially a full ban, knowing when most people find out that they're pregnant. And so essentially with taking away the federal protection for abortion, states are able to do whatever they want. And we have seen some signs of progress. We've seen some ballot initiatives, most famously in Kansas, actually push back against restrictions and codify abortion rights. And of course, in Massachusetts, just a couple of years ago, we did fortunately codify Roe v. Wade via the Roe Act. And I'm sure Senator Friedman will speak about that and more recent legislation. So what can Massachusetts do to help? I'm going to focus the majority of this presentation on what we're doing at Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts. And I'm going to start with more obvious pieces of it. You probably think about Planned Parenthood and you think about the laws that we're trying to change, as well as the healthcare that we provide. So I know it'll be sent out. This is the full list of our legislative agenda, but just to highlight a few, first is the Healthy Youth Act. If folks have been advocates in Massachusetts before, been in politics, then you'll know that this has been filed many, many times for about 11 years now. I started my journey in the Senate in 2013, and it had already been introduced before. And this would essentially just create standards for sex education when it is offered in public schools. And so not saying it's mandated, but when it is offered, then it has to be medically accurate, inclusive, comprehensive, evidence-based, et cetera. The news that Bonnie referenced is that fortunately today, Governor Healy actually proposed new sex education standards for the state. So it would bypass the legislative process if they go into effect. And so now there'll likely be a public comment period for folks to give feedback. And then there will be a vote of the Elementary and Secondary Board of Education. And so hopeful that we might actually not even have to wait for legislative action to get better sex education. So also the Abortion Access Act, that is essentially expanding access. It goes a little bit beyond what the Roe Act was able to do a few years ago. And then most recently, you might have seen a campaign from Planned Parenthood in coalition with our partners, the ACLU and Reproductive Equity Now, in support of location data privacy. And so essentially protecting people when they enter the state for care. We know that folks are increasingly coming to Massachusetts now that so many states have banned or restricted care, but then also protecting privacy for providers and others who are involved with abortions. So those are kind of the obvious ones, and I'll defer to the senator to talk more about legislative and regulatory pieces that are in the mix. But I also want to highlight some things that might not be as intuitive or known for folks. So the other ways that Planned Parenthood is supporting essentially our neighbor states, our faraway neighbor states in this moment is through different pieces of our work, especially what falls under my work at the Aspire Center. So first, we're expanding clinical training. We know that if abortion bans exist in a state, that of course means that folks aren't getting the healthcare they need, but it also means that healthcare providers aren't getting the training that they need. And so there are lots of medical students, residents, and practicing physicians, nurses, et cetera, who now aren't getting trained on abortion care, which of course is important for abortions, but is also important for miscarriage management as well. And so we see increased demand both from folks who want to come to Massachusetts to get trained and then provide care elsewhere, and also from people who are already in Massachusetts and see this demand, see this increased need, and want to get trained. And so I'll speak more about how we're doing clinical training in a moment. The second piece is research. And so we are in the process of conducting clinical, legal, and social science research on key topics and populations in the reproductive and sexual health and rights space. So Planned Parenthood Massachusetts is uniquely positioned to do so. We're actually one of 13 Planned Parenthood affiliates that conducts its own clinical research, and one of only 6 that does its own social science research. And then recently, since starting the Aspire Center, I'm an attorney by training, and I've launched a legal research program that we are now doing with external collaborators who are experts in this space. And so we have, I'll mention a couple of research projects in a few moments, but we are really looking into what we can do to inform the national discussion, and in the clinical research setting in particular, actually inform protocol when it comes to care. And then finally, we can expand sex education and also the professional training that we offer to educators delivering that sex education. So of course, the Healthy Youth Act, or what the governor proposed today, would definitely help with that in Massachusetts. But we're also trying to go into other states, especially states that have abortion bans or restrictions, and to expand sex education there, knowing that that can at least prevent unwanted pregnancies. So I'll walk through a couple examples now before I turn it over to Senator Friedman. So first, just an overview of the Aspire Center model. You can see that there are 3 parts. Like I mentioned, it's our research, our professional education, and our clinical training. The reason we created the center and housed these 3 teams under the center is that we're hoping they can cross-inform one another, and that the sum is greater, that the overall it's greater than the sum of its parts. And what that looks like in practice is applying for grants and external funding together, working on projects together, and even just meeting regularly and having an idea what different teams are doing and how we can potentially help one another and cross-inform some of that work. So a recent example is that we're actually working to develop professional trainings through our professional education programming that actually target folks that are in this quasi-clinical space. So for example, a school nurse or even a gym teacher who don't have a clinical background, in this space, at least in sexual and reproductive health, who work with young people and might need to know about what, an IUD, how that works, what bleeding patterns are like for an IUD, what problems may arise. So things of that nature are things that are coming out of this collaboration. And the mandate here, and I'll go through these all together, essentially we're looking to advance excellence and equity in the sexual and reproductive health care and the well-being of the patients that we serve. And so specifically, we are focused on combating these barriers that disproportionately affect certain populations from accessing sexual and reproductive health care. We are looking at BIPOC, LGBTQ+ folks, young people, and people with disabilities. And so you'll see 3 themes throughout our research and the programming that we offer that we're really focused on those populations. Specifically, we've been working a lot on minors abortion access and what that looks like from a social science perspective, from a legal perspective, et cetera. And again, we achieve these goals through all the teams that I've already mentioned, our research, our professional education, our clinical training. And so one of the projects that we're working on is what we call the Get Real Expansion Project. So Get Real is the curricula that we created in Massachusetts, but is actually taught, and I'll show this, in 44 states and 6 countries around the world. So developed right here in Massachusetts, but taught everywhere. And we also provide training to those educators or community leaders that are teaching young people. So what we're doing with this project, which we've received Planned Parenthood Federation of America funding to do, is to conduct a 50-state national landscape analysis of sex education status, basically looking at the laws around sex education. Is it inclusive, comprehensive? Does it mention abortion, or does it restrict you from talking about abortion? Is it opt-in for parents or opt-out? Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And as we're doing that, we're also looking at these other trends that we see in the parent rights movement. I do it in quotes, but what we're looking at is anti-LGBTQ+ laws, for example, the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, anti-critical race theory laws, even though critical race theory is not really taught in any elementary, middle, or high schools, but laws that specifically ban that. And we've actually even seen laws that move to ban social and emotional learning skills in classrooms, which is, of course, a part of sex ed, but also taught completely separately from sex ed. And so in doing that, we were able to create a score for every single state, very similar to the Guttmacher abortion score, if folks are familiar with that, but essentially creating our own sex ed score of, based on all those factors, what does that state look like? And then you can see we can compare it to the Guttmacher abortion score. And so what we saw here in Massachusetts was that we are protective of abortion, thanks to all the hard work of our legislature and a supportive administration and the resources that we have here. But we actually are right in the middle of the road. We're at a 0 for sex education.
Right.
So of course, that means that there's progress that we can make in Massachusetts. But for the purposes of this project, we're actually hoping to go into these states that are the most restrictive or very restrictive on abortion, but have not yet fully banned comprehensive sex ed or inclusive sex ed or medically accurate sex ed, and try to get on the ground in certain school districts in maybe more progressive pockets of that state that might still be open to comprehensive sex education. Our middle school curricula has been evaluated. We did a multi-year evaluation, and it showed that we actually have this 16% reduction in unintentional pregnancies, unwanted pregnancies for teenagers who have taken that program. And so we are on the US HHS list of evidence-based sex education programs. Basically, that means that we know this works. And so if we can get into these states where folks are not able to access the healthcare they deserve, we can at least try to give them this comprehensive, inclusive sex education that allows them to make the choices that they want to make with their life. So that's one of our projects. That's going to be a year long. We've finished this initial research. We actually shared this with our legislative partners recently. And now we're going to go into these other states and talk to those school districts about getting this program on the ground. The next project I want to highlight is what we're calling MARAP. It is the Minor Abortion Access Research and Advocacy Project. This is also a year-long project. We also received some funding from the Planned Parenthood Federation of America to begin this. And what this looks like essentially is a two-part project. There's a research agenda and there's an advocacy agenda. And this is part of this legal research team that we're trying to build in response to the Dobbs decision. So on the research side, we're essentially trying to map the relationship of states that have these post-Dobbs restrictions, full-out bans with parental involvement laws. So seeing, what is the relationship between these full bans and then how restrictive states are about whether minors are able to access the care they need, or if there are very restrictive parental consent laws, judicial bypass requirements, et cetera. And then also looking at the rise of some novel issues that have cropped up post-Dobbs. So for example, we are seeing the rise of quote unquote human or abortion trafficking laws that essentially criminalize an adult taking a minor out of state to get abortion care. So if that state has an abortion ban and a parent, for example, takes a minor out of state, they could technically fall into this felony that is abortion trafficking. This is passed in Idaho, where we are seeing it be introduced in other places. And so we're also specifically looking into that. And then we move on to the advocacy agenda side of this. And essentially that's sharing the results of the research with lawmakers. Specifically, we're looking to share it with folks who are in mid-access abortion states and high-access abortion states, with the idea that those are folks who are generally supportive of reproductive rights, and maybe even a state like Massachusetts that's been very supportive and has very protective laws, but there are still ways to make it easier for minors who are traveling here, or maybe minors who already live here, from getting the abortion care that they need. So that's another project we're working on. And then last big example I'll share is back to that clinical training piece. And so we are actually launching an advanced practice clinician, which we call APC, residency program. This is funded from Massachusetts Department of Public Health, thanks to funding from the state legislature last session. And it's funded through the end of the FY24 fiscal year, of the fiscal year 24. So this essentially solves some issues that we see in Massachusetts. So an APC for us is the term that Planned Parenthood uses for nurse practitioners and physician assistants. When NPs and PAs come to Planned Parenthood, right out of school usually, they don't typically have any sexual and reproductive healthcare training. And so they have their general training, they probably don't have a ton of work experience, and they don't have any specific sexual and reproductive health experience, which of course is what we offer at Planned Parenthood. So typically what we're trying to do is train people on the job. And we train a lot of folks. We train residents, we train people post-residency. We sometimes have medical students come in to observe. We have a fellowship we've created for doctors post-residency to specifically train with us on abortion care. And what that means is that there's usually 3 other people in the room with a patient at Planned Parenthood. And we want to balance that patient care and patient experience with the training that we're able to do. But there is so much demand for training, specifically in this post-Dobbs environment where people can't go to other states to get the training that they need. We also have a hard time with this population specifically. There's a lot of turnover. There has not been a stable pipeline of this workforce in Massachusetts. And specifically, it's been hard to get folks in our Worcester and our Springfield health centers. And so thanks to this funding from Massachusetts DPH, we are able to create this residency program. It's going to train one APC per year. So it's a 2-year program. So it'd stay on for 2 years. And this is a pilot. We'd love to expand it if we get future funding. And it's going to train them before they have to see patients. So year one is essentially completely dedicated to them studying, practicing on models, learning under the instruction of a seasoned APC. And then year 2, they stay at Planned Parenthood and they do much more independent work, providing this important care. And so we hope that this will stabilize this workforce, create this pipeline in Massachusetts, provide care in Worcester and Springfield where we know we have health equity issues, and then also create a model for other states and other affiliates. And so that's something we've been able to do in just the past few months, trying to meet the need for clinical training. So I know we are going to hold off on questions for now, but I just want to close by saying, of course, there's so many advocacy and legislative pieces of this work, and I know that Senator Friedman will talk about those, but there's also so much else that folks can do and ways that we are trying to meet this moment through our education, our training, and the research itself. And I always tell folks, of course, you can support Planned Parenthood directly. All of that funding helps us do all of this work, but then also you can contribute to abortion funds. And abortion funds help get the folks who need the care in states that don't have access or parts of the state that don't have access and can send them to places like Planned Parenthood, Massachusetts. So I'll leave you with that. I will stop sharing and I look forward to answering questions at the end.
All righty, thank you. Senator Sidney Freeman has been an advocate for many years on women's issues and women's health issues, particularly. She's marched in the 1970s and has been an activist on a variety of fronts on reproductive health care, but she's also been a strong advocate for a variety of other healthcare related issues, chairs the Healthcare Financing Committee, among many other things she does. She is her season towns are Arlington, Billerica, Burlington, Woburn, and Lexington, for those that are looking for the towns that she represents. She's been a leader on women's issues for many years, and we are very happy to have you here tonight, Senator Friedman. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie. Hi, everyone. I'm in Portland, Oregon, actually, at a pharmaceutical conference on how states can handle the high cost of drugs. So I am happy to be able to be here on Zoom. I don't have slides, but I'll just talk. I was asked to talk about what's going on in the legislature in Massachusetts. And I want to also thank Mary Rose for laying out the landscape at the national level and also what Planned Parenthood's focus is. So I'll try and tie that in with what's happening here in Massachusetts. Before I detail what happened last summer in the wake of Dobbs, I just want to take a step back and try to remember 2020, which seems like a very long time ago at this point. 2020 was a very important year for many reasons, obviously. But one of the really big moments in Massachusetts was that the Roe Act was enshrined in state law, and basically it says that women have a right to abortions, and abortion care is legal in Massachusetts. This act eliminated the onerous and unnecessary barriers that delay and deny care and improved access to affordable reproductive care options for young women. Without this commitment that we did in 2020, it would have been much harder to do what we did last year related to reproductive and gender affirming care here in Massachusetts. And I think it would have played out very differently. So that 2020 was really important. Passage of the protections that we put in place this past year was really couldn't happen without the stakeholder collaboration and feedback. This also is especially important because the bill we passed last year included several provisions that could eventually be constitutionally challenged. So we had to make sure that we had the right stakeholders at the table, and those were folks like the Attorney General and ACLU and Mass Health, so that we could ensure that what we were doing was on constitutionally sound ground. This bill also is interesting to note, the one that we did last year, the provider protections, was that it followed a very different timeline than most bills, and we had a very different driving force. We did this bill in 2.5 months, which is basically unheard of for most pieces of legislation, especially pieces of this magnitude. But this was a very unique experience, right? We had found out, we had heard through the leak that the Supreme Court was going to deliver that devastating blow to reproductive rights in our country, that they were going to just ignore 50 years of judicial precedent and overturn Roe v. Wade. And so that's what caused the state of Massachusetts, the legislature, and all the stakeholders to take immediate action. And almost overnight, the focus became on how do we protect our providers and protect essential rights of healthcare. This was a key difference in the passage of expanding protections for reproductive and gender-affirming care that I'd like to emphasize, which is sometimes the most effective driving force behind a bill can be an external event that occurs in Massachusetts, or in this case, on the national political scene. Depending on the gravity of the external event, it can be effective force for helping to pass legislation. Other factors may exist, but really this was the catalyst. And so we often talk in passing big legislative proposals is to grab the moment. And that's what we did. We grabbed this moment. Now, I can tell you that the Massachusetts Senate is completely and totally committed to continuing work to ensure access to affordable reproductive care. In fact, after we passed the provider protection bill, the Senate president asked if I would co-lead a Senate working group to identify a set of priority policies that would moving forward in the reproductive and gender-informed healthcare space. We convened a large group of senators who were interested in this issue, and the working group presented a list to the Senate president that includes a number of recommendations. And we're using that list of priorities as we move forward on legislation. I will tell you that the next big, I think, focus in the legislature is going to be on privacy and security in the reproductive space, because this is really the next challenge, right? It's making sure that our providers and places where we deliver reproductive care are safe and secure. And it also means that your healthcare data is your healthcare data and cannot get to anybody else. No one else has access to that. And as you know, a lot of people, and Mary Rose, I think, referred to it, there are a lot of people in states who are starting to track where their residents go to get reproductive care. And they're using it through location data, phone data. There's companies out there that are happy to grab that information and sell it to the highest bidder. And so we need to really focus on ensuring that information stays private. That bill is it's in play right now, and I know that it's Senator Cream and Senator Feingold are the sponsors for that. I think that in my opinion, that the next easy step would be to pass my bill, which is S646, and that would require commercial insurers to cover all medical care related pregnancy, not just abortion and abortion related care, as we passed last summer. I think a lot of you know that being pregnant, both prenatal care and postpartum care is incredibly expensive for many people is beyond what they can pay. And this has just an enormous consequence on the health of both the mother and child. We want to eliminate those cross barriers. And we want to protect women, and we want to reduce those health disparities, which we are all so aware of now, and that affect just a low income and minority women 2 to 5 times more than they do other women in the Commonwealth. So we're really focusing on that. And it also, by the way, will save our healthcare system money, because our children will get the care they need before they're born, and the mothers will get the care they need, and that just creates a much healthier healthier Commonwealth. Sorry. I think those are some of the things that we are doing. I'll let you know. I just have a list here I have to grab. So just so you
Yeah,
know, in
please,
terms of
yeah. We'll send out action alerts on them. So please, articulate about all those bills.
oh, okay, I will. We can send
Yeah,
them to you.
We've got time. Yeah.
I'll give you them in a minute, but just to know what the Senate put in the budget this year, there's $2 million for grants for improving reproductive health access, and this is access, infrastructure, and safety. So this is money that abortion providers can use to make sure that their sites are safe, and that they have infrastructure in place to help women who are accessing abortions, and it also for funding for people who are seeking abortion outside of the state. There's $1 million for the Public University Health Center Sexual and Reproductive Health Preparation Fund. As you know, one of the provisions of the bill that we passed in the last budget was that our public universities and community colleges have to provide either access to abortion care or clear help in getting folks to an abortion provider or a doctor that may be able to give them the Plan B. We gave him $1 million for freestanding birth centers, because we want to bring back the birth centers in Massachusetts. It's very, very effective care for women. We have $350,000 for the Massachusetts Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Review Committee. These are the folks that track morbidity and mortality in our low income and diverse communities. And we expanded access to reproductive health by allowing pharmacists to dispense hormonal contraceptives. We had, and in terms of supporting our healthcare workers, security, et cetera, in last economic development bill, we added $17.5 million investment and a $1 million investment in a public awareness campaign on the dangers of crisis pregnancy centers. So that $2 million that we put in this year's budget is added to that 17.5. We also gave money to the Attorney General to help set up the helpline that providers can call into to get help on where to get reproductive care, how to get it, and also to help them understand what our laws are. So the big piece of the legislation that we passed last year was basically said, we are going to do everything we can in this state to protect our providers who deliver reproductive care. So that means that you can't be sued by somebody. Your insurance, your malpractice insurance can't go up. You can't lose your license for providing legal care in Massachusetts. We put as much regulation into our statute where the governor or the state cannot help with helping you be sent to another state because you have broken a law in that state that is legal in Massachusetts. And we did everything we could within what we believe is the bounds of the Constitution in order to protect our providers. We also protect providers who are giving abortion, who are, providing abortion pills over telehealth. We've kept it very general so that we say if you are a provider in Massachusetts and you are registered and you are licensed, you may give this care. Now, if you go to Texas, all bets are off, right? We can't do anything about that. But in terms of what you do in this state, we've done everything we can to support you and to protect you from civil suits, criminal suits, etc. So that's generally what we've done and where we're going. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. I have a question to start off with, and then can other people just start raising their hands? You have wonderful Senate budget recommendations. Has the House concurred, and are they going to get through conference committee?
I think there's a lot of agreement in both the Senate and the House on the on abortion care, reproductive care. I don't know about whether the full spectrum pregnancy piece will finally be passed. I think we're starting to see momentum because of all of the data that's come out in terms of the disparities in maternal health. So I'm hoping that this will be the session that we will finally address that in a pretty straightforward way. But I think there's in general a lot of consensus around ensuring that our providers are protected. I mean, one of the things that's really important, and I think that we all did in this last round, was we focused on what does it mean when another state comes into your state and tells you what you can do. And nobody, we have Democrats in the House, in the Senate, that are fairly anti-choice. But when we presented it in that way, and we also said some lawyer is going to decide whether this infant, this fetus who's not been born, is going to decide whether the mother or the child will live if there's an anomaly, or whether a doctor can do the work that they have been licensed and trained to do. When we presented it that way, we had 40 members of the Senate all vote unanimously on our provider protection bill. So it really has to do also with how do you present things to people so that they can understand they actually have some skin in what happens, even though you may not be a woman, or you may never have been pregnant, or or you have a different view of how you want to live your life. People really have come around to it. So I have a lot of faith that we're going to continue to do the right thing.
Well, that's very exciting. In terms of referencing the need for that care, March of Dimes recently did a study in terms of birth rates and death rates of children, mortality, and the people of color are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in childbirth, and children are 6 to 8 times more likely to die. So that's here in Massachusetts. We're not talking about other parts of the world or the country. So we do have a problem, and the Senate, I know, is particularly addressing it. So, and we've had Liz Miranda on, so we are very happy to hear the budget news. So opening it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask either of our speakers? Just if you could raise your hand, either virtually or.
Excuse me, Bonnie, I think Ciara has been collecting the questions and answers.
Okay, fabulous.
Yes, I have a few questions that I've seen in the chat. So the first one is, in addition to supporting legislation, what is the best way to organize support for women's rights?
Mary Rose, do you want to start that one?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. So I think just engagement with people in your life is a really helpful way to start. I actually talked to a couple middle schoolers recently who contacted Planned Parenthood about a project they were doing, and they had a similar question and were specifically asking what they can do with their peers. And I think especially at a young age, but true for everyone of all ages, to start normalizing abortion. There's so much stigma around abortion care, but to talk about it as healthcare, to use the data that we know is there to talk about how safe it is. It's safer than getting your wisdom teeth removed, for example. And so I think just combating that stigma can be something everyone does in their daily lives, with their friends, with their families. I already mentioned it, but I think in a very practical way, abortion funds are really critical right now. We, of course, I work at Planned Parenthood, and I also want to say donate to Planned Parenthood. But abortion funds are really the only way that people in these banned states are able to get out, especially in places that are abortion deserts. And even in Massachusetts, we have abortion funds here, and we've seen certain populations really rely on those abortion funds. People who are survivors of intimate partner violence tend to use those. Of course, people who are lower income, since it provides funds, people of color are more likely to. And so I think supporting that is just a direct way to help people. And then talking about rights in general, I mean, I'm on the C3 side of Planned Parenthood, so I'm not here to advocate, on behalf of Planned Parenthood. But as someone who's worked in politics and government for most of my career, I would say to make sure you vote and that your vote matters. And we saw what happened. Of course, I'm sure everyone here already knew that, but we saw what happened, the Trump presidency directly leading to appointing enough judges and losing Roe. And so your vote, votes matter, and all the way up and down the ballot. In Worcester, for example, there was a long battle about getting sex education into the Worcester public schools, and that was a local campaign that needed local advocates, and ultimately convinced the mayor and the city council there to let Planned Parenthood in and to include sex education in the curriculum. All the way up to, of course, elected officials like Senator Friedman, and the fantastic news out of the governor's office today. So voting really matters too.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, it's really also just not allowing just the conversation to be about abortion, right? It really is about women's health.
Right.
And, people don't sit around and willy-nilly have abortions. I mean, that's just, that is what we're led to believe, that somehow there's going to be a floodgate. It is a very straightforward thing to do when you can catch it early, but there are so many decisions that get made around women's health that really affect women's ability to take care of themselves. And so everything, it's not just abortion care, but it's maternal health, it's women's health. So anything that you can do to promote that. I mean, real health education is so important, because when kids especially learn about their bodies and about how they work and what's going on, they don't go do things that in general will lead them to a place where they have to get extra care, or they, self-harm. It's like treating them like they actually own this body. And that's why the healthy youth and that stuff is so important, right? We really need to start treating us like whole people and taking care of our needs. So anything that you do in that realm to support those efforts really reduces the whole discussion around abortions, which are critical for women to access because they need to and they have a right to. So,
in addition to supporting rights in Massachusetts, what can we, as people in Massachusetts, do to support people in other states?
I'm happy to jump in again. I'll reiterate abortion funds, because again, that's how folks are getting here. And, as Senator Friedman explained, healthcare law is really complex. And the only way to be certain that our providers are safe and patients are safe is that they're getting the care in safe states, which is unfortunate, because we've made so much progress, especially during the pandemic, with telehealth and getting coverage for telehealth and the technology behind it. But unfortunately, the safest way for someone to get care is for them to come in person, even if that's not medically necessary. And so supporting people being able to get here is really important. I also think that what we're seeing is that we really over-relied on Roe v. Wade. And fortunately, in Massachusetts, we didn't. I think between some research, some activism, and of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing away, we knew that this was coming, and the legislature thankfully stepped up and proactively handled this. But in general, I think progressives have seen Roe v. Wade as untouchable. It's there to protect us. We don't really have to worry about all the other ways that we can stand up for our rights, whether that's state level policy, research, advocacy. And so I think ways that you can support that, whether it's, phone banking for a candidate in a different state or contributing to other Planned Parenthood affiliates, abortion funds in other places, or even just being more knowledgeable about this, because I think it was this thing that felt untouchable, felt safe until it happened. And now we are going to see this being thought out state by state. And so folks who, have the ability, have the resources, who can help out either by traveling or by calling into or supporting financially, folks in those states. This is going to be fought at the state level in terms of policy and also in terms of some state courts.
Mm-hmm.
How does Texas get around federal HIPAA patient confidentiality regulations? For example, if an Uber driver thinks that he's driving someone to an abortion, that driver can report the passenger. As a healthcare provider, I'm bound by HIPAA, and I have had its importance annually renewed by the hospitals where the person who has this question works. Isn't HIPAA relevant?
I'm happy to answer that. Senator Freeman might have things to add with the data privacy bill. So, yes, HIPAA is relevant, but HIPAA is the confidentiality between a patient and their provider. And how the Texas bill we're talking about is SB 8, which was before Roe v. Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision. Essentially, Roe v. Wade was overturned in Texas in September 2021. And that's because this is a civil law. So it's not criminalizing abortion, not criminalizing providers, not criminalizing people who get abortion care, but it is creating this bounty system where you can essentially report someone for aiding with an abortion and you get money out of that. And also your legal fees are covered. So there's incentives in order to do so. And so this, like you mentioned, that could be an Uber driver, that could be, and we've seen it kind of be used by ex-partners who know that their partner got an abortion. So anyone who helped them get that abortion, whether it's friends or, the patient navigator who helped them get somewhere else, whoever helped them secure medication abortion, for example. So it was built specifically so that there's no way to challenge it. So first of all, it's skirting around HIPAA because it's targeting anyone who helps you get care. Second, it's also, there's no state action because it's not a crime. So the state government is not in charge of enforcing this law. It's only individuals. Because of that, there has not been able to be a real challenge until someone starts getting in trouble. And that essentially shut down Planned Parenthood clinics, other health centers immediately, because you can get money, you can sue essentially per abortion. And so if you're suing a health center that does a lot of abortion care, you can essentially put people out of business really quickly. And so it was, you could say creative, you could say evil. It was a specific legal strategy to skirt a lot of the existing concerns, especially by making it a civil law. So that's my part of the answer.
Although it is a criminal law for the provider. So the provider,
Also
that is a criminal, but HIPAA doesn't, as Mary Rose said, HIPAA doesn't cover you knowing that your friend. What we did in Massachusetts was we really tightened those extradition charges. So even for our providers, it's much harder to extradite somebody from Massachusetts to Texas when they've delivered the care in Massachusetts. But that's to address this issue of bounty hunting, which is what Texas is hoping people will do. And there will be people all over the country that will give those bounty hunters tons of money to come to the state. So,
this one's directly for you, Mary Rose. Can you comment on medication abortion as well as D&C type procedures, and is Planned Parenthood protecting both approaches?
Yep. So we offer, there's two types of ways to get an abortion. There's medication abortion, which is delivered via two medications, mifepristone and misoprostol. We call them Miffy and Miso for short. And then there's also procedural or surgical abortions, which is the same as kind of aftercare for a miscarriage. So Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts offers both. So patients can come to our health centers and get both types of care. Fortunately, because we are in a protective state and we have support from our legislature and our leaders, all of that is protected. And so folks who come to Massachusetts from other states, if they're getting either of those procedures in person, they're protected, their providers are protected because of what Senator Friedman talked about. There has been recent news in the past few months about mifepristone specifically, so folks might be familiar with a back and forth of that. It's very technical, but essentially there is a challenge in Texas. Someone essentially was jurisdiction shopping, meaning they're trying to find a court that'd be friendly to their ridiculous claim. And so they found a Texas judge who's appointed by Trump and tried to challenge the safety of this medication by saying essentially the FDA, it's being used in ways the FDA didn't originally approve it for. So it's being used for longer, for later stage pregnancies. It's being sent via mail for many reasons, including the pandemic, and who's actually prescribing it, whether there's actually a provider in the room prescribing it or not. So there are lots of ways that as there are with many medications, that had changed over time. And so there was this lawsuit in Texas that made its way up to the Fifth Circuit, eventually made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declined it. So now it's back in the Fifth Circuit that would have gotten rid of the FDA label for mifepristone. So again, we're really lucky and we're grateful to the Massachusetts legislature and our leaders. Governor Healy essentially created funding for abortion providers across Massachusetts. We got a call right before that court case was set to come down and said, buy as much mifepristone as you can and we will pay you for it. So, which was fantastic. So we actually ended up stockpiling it because we still could have given it even if it was off label. We just couldn't have bought it. And that way we would have actually been able to cover for about 2.5 years patients who wanted medication abortion in Massachusetts. Thankfully, it seems like that Miffy is hopefully safe and this won't be an issue, but it was something that we are proactively looking at. And thankfully the administration and our supporters in state government were also looking at.
Good. Cindy?
What? Oh, are there other questions that?
There
people
are,
have?
yes.
Wait, okay, go ahead.
Are there any programs or activities that bring people together to discuss reproductive rights in respectful ways? For example, church groups, social groups, etc.
I don't know the answer to that.
We offer programs at Planned Parenthood, so it's one venue for it. On our 501c3 side, we have community organizers. So they go in, they do exactly what you think they do. They go into the community, they partner with like-minded organizations. They go into after-school programs, like places that they're invited to be, and they will tell people about the services that we offer. They'll talk about sex education and the programs and the training that we offer. And so we're not really creating spaces, but we're going into spaces that exist and making sure that folks have these resources. And then on our 501c4 side, so more of our advocacy side, we also have political organizers. And those are folks who are going into the community to share the same things, but then they're also helping out with certain political campaigns. So they're supporting the candidates that we endorse. Maybe they're supporting ballot questions or other issues that align with our legislative agenda. And so again, there's a lot of Planned Parenthood presence in these community spaces. But yeah, I'm not sure beyond that. There's lots of other nonprofits that do similar work. So I would look into that, but Planned Parenthood should be in those spaces.
But I thought the question actually was, are there places where people can get together to have conversations about where there's differences of opinion? Is that the question?
It can be read that way, but
Okay.
that it doesn't say that specifically. And then my last question that I have in my list is, yesterday, the Healthcare Financing Committee dealt with the threat of closure of the birthing center in Leominster. I'm not sure if I said that place right.
Leominster.
Yeah.
Leominster, yes. And other such services. Would the enactment of Massachusetts Medicare for All currently in that committee straighten out the financing mess? And would the repeal of the financing regulation in 1991 re-empower the Commonwealth to curb such antisocial behavior as the removal of needed services and closure of essential facilities?
No, I do not believe that Medicare for all would necessarily affect what's happening in Leominster. So in Leominster, the issue is with the hospital there. It's their maternal health and unit that's closing. Okay, so they call it their birthing center, but a birthing center, it's not a standalone, it's part of the hospital. So a hospital, what we need to do, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. I don't think that what we need to do that healthcare for all would, or single payer would affect that. What we need to do is update our agencies that oversee what kinds of healthcare entities get licensed and under what conditions they have to practice in the Commonwealth. So right now, we have no enabling language that allows the Department of Public Health to say to a hospital, for instance, no, you can't close that unit because it's an essential service. So, which is what's going on right now. And that's what people were talking about. And what this legislation is trying to do is to say, if you're an essential service, then different rules need to apply to you because clearly you're essential. And we shouldn't allow that. We shouldn't allow you to just close it. But the whole issue around how does a hospital function and whether there should be a hospital or not be a hospital and what kind of healthcare entities we have in the Commonwealth is a kind of separate discussion for how we pay for healthcare. They're very directly related because UMass Medical is closing the Leominster maternity ward because they feel that it's a money loser or they want to funnel money into a different place, into their system. But that's a sort of a bit of a separate piece than how the government controls who delivers healthcare, and how we are going to legislate when they can close and when they can close and under what conditions, unless the government owns every single healthcare entity and then they can decide that. But I don't think single payer would cover that. At least my understanding of single payer would not cover what hospitals, function where and what services they provide.
Is that, do you have any other questions?
I don't
Would Sandy like to comment? That's a question from Sandy. Is he on? I think he must be on. On healthcare financing, on Medicare for all, but that's another forum we can have, actually with Senator Friedman particularly, I think, since you're healthcare financing. Sandy, there you are. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie, and thanks for the presenters. My name is Sandy Eaton. I'm a retired bedside nurse. I've taken care of patients directly my whole life, and retired now. As a parent, as a grandparent, I'm very concerned about health, a full range of health access for all of my family, especially in this context, the women in my family, and I'm, not only did we deal with or try to deal with the closure in Leominster, but my city of Quincy, which because it has too many Medicare and Medicaid recipients, doesn't bring in enough profit for Stewart Healthcare, is the prime example, and the state has proven itself powerless to rein in these economic forces that are depriving whole ranges, the deserts of maternal care and everything else. So I would argue that if we have a single payer financing system, we would value each person's health equally. Someone who's on Medicare, Medicaid wouldn't be on Medicaid. We'd all be in the same system. We'd all get equally financed, and that would pull the rug out from under the decision makers in our corporatized healthcare and force them. Also, this whole thing from Chapter 495 of 1991, the bipartisan scheme that was going to put all the scorpions in the same bottle as the Senate, as your predecessor, Senator Freeman, put it back at that time, failed. It closed scores of community hospitals,
Right, huge.
including my own in Quincy. And I and my wife are very concerned that there's no even emergency room close enough in the next healthcare crisis we're going to face. So the system is chaos, and we do need to take charge. And I think fair funding for all in the system is one part of it, and certainly empowering the DPH to finally regain what it had at one time to take control. But of course, those who profit from this current setup are going to resist bitterly any attempts. We've seen that time and time again as we've tried not only in the legislative, but also in passing ballot questions. So,
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. You know, I'm not sure that if we didn't blow the whole thing up, we'd be any worse off at this point. I just know that the political realities at this moment are not such that we could do some of the very fundamental things that we would need to do to get to a single payer system. We were going to need a lot of help from everybody in order to do that. I mean, I could take a vote that says we're going to raise everybody's taxes by, somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. But look, we couldn't get, we barely passed a budget, we barely passed a referendum that was just raising an additional 4% on people that made over $1 million. I mean, that was a Herculean effort to do that. And so, we need to understand what we can do and what we can't do. And again, it's finding the moment, right? It's like is there a moment where we can actually make a change? And I would say that what's happening in Leominster is a really, another indication of here's a moment where we could make some really fundamental changes on how we deliver healthcare and who gets to decide who's going to close and who's not going to close. But those are the political realities that we face. Now, at the federal government, it would be a lot different. Those costs would probably go down, that extra taxes would probably, because the pool would be so much bigger. But also the other thing we have to remember is Medicare rations healthcare. Now, they ration it in the most thoughtful way they can, but this notion that we will go to a single payer and that all healthcare is going to be available for everybody is not, it's a false promise. We ration healthcare today because of the cost. That's how we ration healthcare. Either it can pay for it or you can't pay for it. But we will always be having to make those decisions about what kind of care we give when and to who. And we just have to be ready to accept that if we go to a single payer system and look at Medicare. People love their Medicare, but it's very clear about what it pays for and what it doesn't pay for. And so we just have to be ready. And I want that to be clear to people that that's what we're going to be doing when we go to a Medicare for all system. I personally don't have any problem with it, but we just need to be clear.
Well, the burden on those of us in the rank and file and in the grassroots is to build the irresistible force to overcome that immovable object. And we're doing it through mass care, through the Massachusetts Nurses Association, through the Massachusetts Teachers Association. And we will prevail over the corporate greed that is giving us these deserts where care is pulled out.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I'm just saying, we got certain things we got to get done in order to get there. So anyway.
Thank
Thanks.
you so much. Sandy, anything else you want to mention?
No, thank you, Senator Friedman. I think the issues are very clear.
Yeah. And obviously it calls for another webinar on Medicare for All. So we would love to have you back, Cindy, on that front. We've had a fabulous webinar here. Mary Rose Mazzola, fabulous information and exciting programming. Cindy, as well, you've been terrific in terms of women's health issues and healthcare issues. So we do appreciate all the work you've put in over many years, actually. It's appreciated. It is a lot of work that you both have been doing. So we thank you very much for attending. And I would like to just say that we will have action steps that we will ask you to take, the recipients, and we'll send it out to other groups that might be interested to follow the legislative agenda for the Planned Parenthood legislation and any budget items. Cindy, if you could send us, that would outline. We were very excited when Liz Miranda spoke with us about the push on maternal child health. So that is really quite exciting. There's not too many happy things to announce, but that's like we should celebrate some good things. And we thank you all for participating, and we will again follow up with a resource page and an action page. Take care all. A lot of us probably nurses here. So take care and have a good evening.
Bye.